fundamentally, a lot of women are reaching burnout. And that burnout is more common in working mothers than any other demographic group. Society dictates that wealth is success. When you break it down to it as a mother, it's much more than that. When women realise what they want is actually different to what society expects, that's where the shift happens. We pick up 90% of the work at home, even if the mother is in a high-powered, high-pressured, maybe breadwinner role.
Hi, I'm Caroline Carey and welcome to the Eat Nourish Love Podcast. For over 20 years, I've created events, raised over 4 million for good causes, and been lucky enough to meet some incredible people along the way. This podcast is about exploring stories and insights that really shape us, with inspiring guests from wellness, business, self-care and personal growth. It's about learning to trust our intuition and discovering what truly matters, and how, with hard work, belief and tenacity, we can make so many things happen. So welcome back to the Eat Nourish Love Podcast. I'm Caroline Carey, and today we're talking about something which affects every ambitious woman who become a mother, the identity shift, the pressure and the emotional roller coaster that nobody prepares us for. My guest this morning is Katherine. I'm so excited to have this conversation. So please go ahead, introduce yourself and how you got involved in this amazing business.
Well, thanks, Caroline, for having me. So I established my business, Thrive in Motherhood, about 3 years ago, because I felt that there was a lack of support for women, predominantly in the senior leadership space, but across the board, in terms of women juggling their careers alongside motherhood. And I was at a big career turning point for myself, and I was worrying and anxious about stepping up and potentially becoming a partner at one of the big 4 firms. And I had 3 children under 4 at the time, and I had always aspired to run my own business, and had absolutely loved the coaching space, loved personal development, supporting people when I was in leadership roles, and I thought this was a time to do something different and ideally fill that gap in the market, really, to support those women who are constantly surviving, feel like they're drowning, feeling like they're never enough, torn between motherhood and their career, worrying about how they're going to fill that ambition and yet obviously be that present and fun mum at home. And there's a lot of confusion and identity shifts going on in those first few years of motherhood, and I wanted to support women in that space.
Now, there's a really interesting word that I've never come across before, and I should have done. How do you say it's a matrescence?
Matrescence.
Matrescence. So explain to us what that means.
So you're not alone. Very few people know the word. For a start, matrescence is the term that defines the transition from womanhood into motherhood, and it impacts us from societally, economically, physiologically, psychologically, you name it. Women are absolutely impacted in every way when we become mums, and very few people know about this word. It was coined in 1973 by a lady called Dana Raphael, who coined the word doula, which we're all familiar with. And she did a lot of research in the subject of motherhood over in the States, and it didn't really get traction. And interestingly, the word has only entered the English dictionary in 2020. So it's a really recent word, but the shift from womanhood into motherhood is as big as adolescence. It's as big as the menopause. It is a subject that impacts, as you say, any female who becomes a mum. And there is matrescence as well, so the impact for fathers too. So it's something we all should know about, and I'm obviously very keen to spread the word about it. And when I heard the word, it explained everything to me. I could understand why I felt the way I did, why I felt so torn, why I felt like a different woman to who I was perhaps 10 years previous. Everything made much more sense. And then I decided that I wanted to certify in in the subject and became a certified coach with the leading coach / activist in the space of matrescence, who's an Australian lady called Amy Taylor-Kabaz.
So is it sort of, I suppose it's a bit like sort of people are struggling through whether it's sort of hormone imbalance and they're low and they don't know what it is. And I suppose this is, again, it's something that people don't understand, that it hasn't been explained to them before. And so they probably feel quite isolated and alone. They may feel that it's only they are going through that. Is that the sort of case?
Completely. Every client I speak to and every person that comes into my world, attending my master classes or whatever, feels the same. They think it's only them. And when they start being amongst a community of women who actually are going through the same thing, it's very, very enlightening. Coming back to the hormonal imbalance and things, even the medical profession don't know the word yet. And I believe that a lot of people get wrongly diagnosed with postnatal depression because perhaps doctors don't understand this word, and a lot of women perhaps are going through that matrescence journey, and it might not be as severe as perhaps doctors are saying it is with regard to the depression angle, because it is such a big shift in everything we do and the way we think. And the responsibilities that we have, what society thinks of us, it all changes, and a lot of women feel not good enough. When they become mums, they feel they're failing at work, they're failing at home, because they're trying to live up to really high expectations. And when they think about matrescence and they understand the feelings and the emotions that go alongside motherhood, then they realise that they're not alone.
And can people, this is probably difficult because we don't want to make claims on this podcast, but can people sometimes be put on medication, or they're misdiagnosed in society? I
suspect that does happen. Based on just the conversations that I have had with GPs, just informally on the subject, if a GP doesn't know what matrescence is, and some woman turns up at their surgery with issues of anxiety, serious overwhelm, confusion, really just not themselves, then obviously GPs are going to go to what they know, the theory they know, the education they have, and prescribe perhaps things that might not be needed if that woman just understood this word and how they were feeling was a bit more normal in society.
And presumably it's not just when you have one child, it's when every time you have a child, you this sort of condition is going to be repeated, this feeling is going to be repeated.
Exactly. Yes, and it does impact people at different stages. So I, for example, carried on after child number 1. I didn't feel radically different. Obviously I knew I was a mum, but it just didn't hit me. I would say my matrescence journey really started and impacted me on pregnancy with number 2 and certainly birth of number 3. So it can hit you at any point in your motherhood journey. It doesn't even have to be at birth. Someone might think 4 years down the line when they've got a toddler running around the house, or a preschooler or a child who's about to go to school, that might be the time where they think, oh my gosh, what's just happened to me over the last 4 years? I'm so different. I need different support. My emotions are all over the place. I can't think.
And that must have quite a big impact, particularly if they go back into work and professionally.
Massively, because we are expected as women to carry on regardless. We want to be educated the same as men, compete with men, do the same jobs as men. We're exceeding men in a lot of spaces now, and when you bring in motherhood into that, fundamentally a lot of women are reaching burnout, and that burnout is more common in women, working mothers, than any other demographic group in society. So that in itself says that we're putting so much pressure on ourselves as mums now, from a work perspective, but obviously also the home perspective.
And what sort of feelings are people getting? What are the sort of symptoms of this?
Real overwhelm, lack of headspace, not being able to think effectively, feeling very split between who they were pre-children, who they are now, constantly pushing to do better, both at work and at home, to try and prove themselves. And therefore, they're fundamentally exhausted all the time. And, we've seen it in our friends, I'm sure you've seen it in other women. It is that huge pressure we put on ourselves to be the best mum we can be, and we want to continue our career as if nothing has happened. And fundamentally, we're now doing two jobs, as mums. Those that are obviously, in the working world as well, and that pressure is immense.
And obviously you lived this because you were originally were in the army. You then also went work for one of the big four, 3 children under 4, and a big career. So what were you feeling?
My specific memories were feeling really confused and really torn between a career that I had spent 20 years building. I knew I had a fantastic career trajectory ahead. I had stakeholder support. I had a brilliant organisation I was working for. I loved my employer. And yet I wanted to, be a hands-on mum, be present, be fun without having to worry about turning my laptop on every evening or missing bedtime because I would have a big commute and I was in London 4 days a week or whatever. Missing elements of my children's childhood because of obviously work. And I felt so torn that I was like, how can I make this work? And what needs to shift. And when I learnt about matrescence, I realised that actually this isn't just me. This is, everyone's going through this in their own ways. And that's why I obviously fell into this space to support women.
What I think is so interesting is there's a huge shift going on at the moment. I mean, it's been going on quietly, obviously, before COVID, then COVID. I mean, women make up now about 72% of the UK female employment, with over 16 million people at work. They're getting more and more dissatisfied. I went to a conference the other day, which was a corporate one in London, and so many people wanted to come out and start their own businesses. So what is the rate of new businesses building at the moment within female founders?
I couldn't give you the statistics, but I know I'm seeing a trend, even in just over 2.5 years. I've seen a trend of the number of women that I'm talking to who are thinking about doing big career shifts, big career pivots like myself, out of corporate to run their own business. Because I think there is a need now for women to do more purposeful work. And I had a conversation yesterday with a client. She works in financial services, and she said, "There's only so much I want to do to make people richer. That isn't my lifelong trajectory. And now I have children. I want to be making a bigger impact, and she's talking about pivoting into the charitable sector. And that's massive in itself. So I think when you become a mum, your values and priorities change, and something that we don't actually look at a lot as women. We don't think about our values too much. And I talk about that a lot with clients, that values fundamentally drives us perhaps to the need to do more purposeful, more impactful work. And that was certainly something from my perspective, as I've got a passion for supporting and helping people. Actually, I've got a passion now for motherhood. I can make a real difference just on a one-to-one basis, and building a community, as you say, that women don't have.
You've come from a very interesting background. I would say that it's a very helpful background in terms of coming into the coaching world, because you've been in the army, and that's my husband was in the forces, so I understand that the mental, what do I want to say, the sort of how you behave and discipline and the conventional world, and goal orientated and really focused. And then obviously you've been in one of the biggest, the big four. So you come into this because I think one of the biggest things for people going into businesses is the fear of the financial risk.
Yes. And of course there's a risk. You're used to having a secure salary, and then you're making that decision potentially to step away from that, at least in the short term. I have a number of clients who are on this journey at the moment, and I think what pieces of advice I would give to people is have that secure financial plan and actually work out what you need versus what you want. So society dictates that in a lot of cases, wealth is success. And actually, when you break it down to it as a mother, it's much more than that. You need a certain amount, obviously, of income, but it's not necessarily what you have had in the past. And I think a lot of women get caught in that trap of a lot of the people I work with who are the breadwinners in the families. And they think, I've got to continue pushing to earn these big figures. And actually, when you break it down to, if you have a plan and you know how to move your business forward, and you've got a good business strategy, you can actually achieve amazing things. But you have to take that risk in the first instance. I don't miss my large corporate salary, and now when you negate tax, and I pay corporation tax and not income tax now and all that sort of stuff, fundamentally I'm probably just as well off now in terms of earnings as I was in the Big Four. So it's a risk, but the payoffs are obviously bigger.
Yeah, and I think also the other thing is that I've always said this. I think I had this conversation with my children that you've got to work out how you like to work, because we've got a couple of children who are more institutionalized than others, and they work very well on the corporate ladder. They find it stimulating, and they're creative within that space. Although it's pretty challenging at times, they're quite, they don't feel that as a compromised situation. Whereas the creative people, so I always think if you understand how you like to work, if you're good at being self-employed, that's great. If you're not very good, then you need a bit of help, don't you?
Definitely. I think self-employment certainly suits certain people. You need to be self-motivated. You do need that discipline that obviously I've got from the military. You need a passion for what you're doing. You've got to, no one's going to get you out of bed in the morning. You've got to want to sit at your laptop and work with clients, or send that email, do whatever. But the support is there for women who are who are nervous about that career pivot, and starting a new business. You might not be business savvy. I was very fortunate. I also did an MBA, so before I even went into the corporate space, I had a passion for business. It was my favorite subject at school. I've always wanted to do an MBA, and then did it. So I had that innate need and desire, I suppose, and not everyone has that. If they're stepping out of corporate into this unknown field of like, I want to do this, I want to follow a passion, but actually how can I make money from it, which is fundamentally the business aspect.
What happens when someone goes, actually, I want to give up my corporate life, I want to be back working alongside the children, I want to be able to juggle that, but I don't know what to do. I have no idea what I want to do, but I'm not happy where I am.
So first and foremost, I look at values with people. So and work out how you can live out your values. What needs to happen to make sure that you are happy and motivated and fulfilled, and that comes back to living in alignment with your values, which I start with all my clients. And then there are various tools and techniques that I can use to support people find that purpose. And I've done it recently, this last few days, with a client who is unsure about exactly where she wants to pivot to, but knows that she doesn't want to remain in the industry she's in. And there are ways to, questions to ask, what are you good at? What does the world need? What can you be paid for? And what do you love? And if you identify those questions, which is part of the Ikigai model, they will give you slightly more of a direction into your purpose. And I think when you align your purpose with your values, that is when you create an opportunity for you to take forward as a business. And then it's just learning the business side on top of it.
You mentioned Ikigai. Can you just explain that a bit more?
Ikigai is a Japanese model which is all around purpose finding. So to find your purpose, you need your mission, you need your vocation, you need your passion. And when you bring all that together, you can live a happy, contented life. And we know that the Japanese culture generally are a very happy society. They're very contented with where they are and who they all are. And it stems from some of these tools that come out of Japan. So that's just one particular one that I use with clients around purpose.
Obviously, you came to the Eat Nourish Love Autumn Fair, and it was so lovely to meet you there, and you came to some of the talks, things like that. Obviously, you go out to events and you go and meet people. Is that how you find new customers? Is that how you help others?
So a range. I do speaking events. I've done some corporate speaking events, some networking events. Obviously, things like Eat Nourish Love. I'm very active on social media. Instagram is my particular social media platform of choice, and I do paid social media advertising to get the word out as well. So a range.
So mothers at home, they come back, they're working from home, they've got the children. How do you stop that juggling burnt out feeling?
I think a lot of it comes down to two things. First is boundaries. I talk a lot about boundaries with my clients. How to set a good boundary. What is a healthy boundary for you? What are you in control of? What are you not in control of, both at home and at work? And understanding what you're prepared to compromise on. Is it that you have to be around for bedtime? What are the specific non-negotiables, I say to women, that you want to maintain, and where can you flex? And I think when you're more confident with your boundaries and you can have those sometimes uncomfortable conversations with people around what your boundaries are, you can feel a little calmer, more in control, less overwhelmed, obviously less burnt out. And the second one, a lot of clients I work with around is emotional resilience. So it's building that emotional resilience to positive emotions and flipping the negative ones, ideally on their head. So obviously, the likes of mum guilt, really, negative guilt, we've all suffered that emotion, but it's like, okay, how can we go about shifting that, having a reframe of why you're feeling guilty? What are the benefits of what you're doing that are making you feel guilty? But there's obviously a positive. So our actions dictate our emotions, and so our actions are giving us that emotion. Can we reframe it to why are we doing X? Which is a positive, because we're doing something for a reason. It's not because we want to suffer the mum guilt. That's the side effect. So it's reframing emotions, building that emotional resilience, and tapping into that negative inner critic that we've all got, and better understanding how we can turn that off and dial it down when it gets too loud and we're being told that we're not good enough, or oh my gosh, that's awful, we shouldn't have done that because I feel so guilty, or the like.
But who's telling us?
That's our critic. But our critic comes from society, which is obviously, partly where you started with, that society's expectations on us, put so much pressure on us that we expect to do this, we have to do this, we have to do that. Our diaries have to be full. We have to be at that corporate meeting. We have to go to that networking event in an evening, when actually we might not want to do that. And I think when women realise what they want is actually different to what society expects, that's where the shift happens.
I think there's a big shift going on because, you look at the drinking culture, you look at people trying to drink less. They actually want to be at home more. They're not so much wanting to go off to the pubs and everything else. Obviously, we need to keep society moving. And so, we need to make quite sure that we're all supporting all these businesses. But it is interesting to see how values are changing.
Society's values are massively changing. And I think people are putting their well-being much more front and centre. And it's not it's not a negative now to be putting ourselves and what we need first sometimes, but it takes confidence to do that. And I think when women are perhaps lacking that confidence, having just had children and are just finding their path, it can be quite difficult, to say no and to do what they want to do.
Don't you think that sometimes when you get that inner critic coming in, sometimes if you can sit with it and you can understand where it's coming from, it could be the fact that there's a little lesson in there in terms of, well, it's because you're trying to do it all with the children when actually they needed concentrated, focused time.
Yes, completely. And I will quote a stat, but please forgive me, it's perhaps not 100% right, but it's something like 8 minutes a day is all a child needs quality focused attention from a mother. That is so small. As long as they're feeling loved, obviously, in the whole bigger package of the home. But actually that focused attention, we are trying to put so much pressure on ourselves to be there all the time and maximize every minute with them. And if we feel bad if we don't have that half an hour uninterrupted, well, actually, when you break it down, it's only a really small amount of time that we really have to be with our children. And when that you turn that on its head, then you feel less guilty. And you take my mindset now is it's much more about role modelling. My children are a bit older now. It's like, well, I want to role model the behaviours that I want them to obviously perhaps pick up and encourage them to have a good career and work hard and all those things in the future. That's not a negative. I shouldn't feel guilty about doing something for me from a work perspective, but also supporting them and in being a role model too.
Don't you think also the fact that can also be a pressure, because it's like we're trying to be good at everything. So the role model can also be a pressure, but I suppose it's not a pressure if you're being authentic.
There is a pressure. And when I say role model, I'm not meaning that archetypal role model on a pedestal. I'm not trying to be that person, but I'm trying to obviously educate my children how I want them to be and support themselves in the future. And I think when we take that slightly different stance to our guilt, our frustrations, our resentment, whatever it might be negatively at the home, it can change a lot of things. So just slightly off point, and I think this is quite an easy analogy to think about, is lots of people feel guilty when they leave home to do exercise or go to the pub or whatever. I used to feel awful when I walked out of the house with 3 young children to go for a run. I'd leave my husband and I felt really guilty, awful, but I knew that I had to do it. My exercise was fitness. Turn it on its head and say, I'm role modelling now, doing good exercise, going out for a run, healthy living to my children, I feel completely different. And now my children see me in my running clothes, they will instantly say, oh, Mummy, you're going to a run, are you going to play tennis, or you were doing this? And that is a really healthy attitude for them to have in the future. It's taken the pressure off me because I feel now that I flipped it on its head and I can be comfortable, obviously do my own thing. But I wasn't, when they were really, really small.
Do you think that's changed?
Yes, because that pressure to be there all the time, be at home 24/7, be at work 24/7, we can't physically do it. And so I think women do find it hard to step out and do their own thing. As you said, and we've just said, it is becoming easier because people are putting their well-being higher on that agenda. But I think certainly in those early stages of motherhood, people really feel guilty at prioritizing anything else but family or work, and that fundamentally sometimes is too much. It's capacity. They haven't got any more capacity to put themselves forward and go for that run or do whatever they wanted to do.
Katherine, where has that come from? Where is that guilt feeling?
I use a term which resonates with a lot of people I mention it to, is feminism is what motherhood forgot. So we have been brought up over the number of years, to be, go out, as I said, compete, be seen on a level playing field with our male colleagues, our husbands, our dad, whoever. And yet we still fundamentally have the responsibilities, and we pick up 90% of the work at home, even if the wife, the mother is in a high powered, high pressured, maybe breadwinner role. in the family, they will still be doing 90% of the work at home. And that it's that pressure and the need to constantly be as good as we can be, that feminism is promoted, that actually when you come to it, you think, oh my gosh, mother has just been forgotten about here. We've got to pick up the pieces.
So presumably you've got a mixture of clients and people that you work with, and others that work with who are maybe married or single parents or whatever. How do you handle the male aspect of this situation?
So I always caveat it, and I'll caveat it now, I'm not a relationships coach. Conversations about partners and husbands comes into conversations quite regularly. There is a lot of resentment, and I felt it myself, and until I felt it, I didn't realise how regular it happens. And so many women I work with, have these feelings. They have resentment towards their partners, because, as I said, they're not as involved. They haven't got the pressure, the birthday cards to think about, the food shopping, generally the meal planning for the week. All of that stuff still does 90% of the time fall to women. And so there is a resentment that a guy can go to work, get on the train in the morning, commute wherever, come home, and actually hasn't got to worry about that sick child who's on the sofa whilst trying to work at home, because they've had to the female's not gone into the office because they've had to manage the sick child and the like. It generally does come down to the pressures and the responsibilities of us as women, and therefore there is a resentment between the sexes.
Do you think that's changed? Do you think it's changing? I certainly,
yeah. I'm not saying we are nowhere near like 1950s housewife days gone by, where women did everything, and blokes would walk in and sit on the sofa and put their feet up and then be served food. No, I'm not going like that at all. And my husband's incredibly supportive, and I'm sure loads of the listeners, husbands and partners are too.
Totally.
But there is an element of I, for example, yesterday had to ask my husband, because I wasn't going into school and he was doing drop-off, so again, being very supportive, to go to the school uniform shop to buy a new sports jumper for my son who's lost his. I've never seen a male in that school uniform shop ever in the number of times I've been in there. He was a bit, I think Pete, my husband, was a bit nervous about doing it. He goes, oh, well, will William know what he needs and stuff? And I'm like, yes, he will. And you should know what he needs, because we wash his stuff every week, etc. But there was a slight anxiety about that, and I could sense it, and that is what I'm meaning. It's like we're expected to do all that. Just think about it, it's just nothing. And then you give perhaps your partner an additional responsibility, and sometimes it's a tiny responsibility, but it can be like, oh, okay, well, I cope, yes.
But I think what's lovely about what you do, and I think what's really important, is the fact that you understand both sides of it. And it's just it's not the individuals, it's society, it's where we've come from, it's the history, it's putting it all into perspective, isn't it?
It's fascinating, really, really interesting. Yeah, and I don't think people look at it holistically, and that's what I notice from a lot of the conversations I have is people don't look at career, motherhood, leadership as a holistic package, as it were. Everything impacts everything else, and how we live our lives in one way is impacted by motherhood, and what we want out of life is impacted by motherhood, or work's impacted. And people, I think, sometimes don't take that lens, and they just muddle through and don't realise that they've changed, or the impact is as big as perhaps they thought it was.
And also, we just talked about the fact how many people are in business, but they say by I think 2030, women are projected to manage up to 60% of the UK's wealth, and also managing all the finances at home. Why do you think that's all changing so much?
Oh gosh, I think women are so capable. We have so much to give, and perhaps in society's gone by, and we're talking perhaps, my mother's generation, my grandmother's generation, we haven't had those opportunities, and now we want to fulfill them. I certainly know that I want to fulfill my potential to whatever that is. And I think 90% of women feel like that. And so they will, strive forward and make big headway in, in the workspace, in the entertainment space, in politics. We can capable, and if that is what that woman particularly wants and is driving that person, then go for it.
And don't you think I think someone was saying that the beauty of these podcasts is that you've got all sorts of information coming out, lots of people speaking openly about things. So suddenly it's giving people opportunity, it's inspiring people to go off and do things, it's listening about what you can do for your health. And, obviously some of them you've got to be careful about who, and you're not taking things literally in some situations, particularly in the medical field, and making sure that you're not making claims. But I think it's a lovely space that's making people much more creative and much more hopeful in the workplace.
Yeah, 100%. I think creativity is something that perhaps has been a little underplayed, and people haven't had that confidence to go out and exert what they want to produce and deliver for the world, and more women are doing that now, and that's amazing.
What do you think that workplaces, when they're at work, what do you think that where they're not supporting, where they could be better for women in work?
I get asked that question a lot. I think a lot of organisations are trying really hard, and I think they are making an impact in flexible working and policy, and supporting those women on a practical sense on that return to work journey, for example, after maternity leave. But actually, from the conversations I have, it's actually a year, 18 months down the line is when women need that support. It's not necessarily on return. They're all excited generally to be going back to work because they're using their brain again. The women I work with are career minded. But actually it's a year down, 18 months down the line, when they've got a toddler in the house and perhaps they're having a second child. It's, do I really want this now? And the emotional support is just not there in the workplace. The workplace do not offer support around fully understanding that mum guilt, the overwhelm that comes with the mental load and what's going on in the background to that woman that day when she turns up at work, and she's got a sick child, or taking the child to a hospital appointment and stressing about having to cancel a client meeting that afternoon because she can't be there and she has to be at the hospital. None of that support is there, and I think all employers need to be a bit more aware of the pressure that women are under, especially those working mums, and support them in a more holistic way.
Do you still think there's that pressure about women and it shouldn't be, the fact that they may go and have children and they may go and have another child, and the continuity of work within a company?
That's a challenge, but that's not changed. I guess, well, having said that, obviously the more women that we promote, and obviously when we get the gender pay gap, more even and all of that, then yes, there will be more impact, across an organisation around those gaps, because women have the maternity leave. But organisations need to deal with that. That's life. That's never going to change. I don't feel women should be pressurised to go back. I've got clients who've gone back 3 or 4 months after baby's born, because they felt that is what they need to do, and they felt under pressure to do that. And that first year of after birth is a really important year. Any mother can say that it's an important year, and it's sad that women feel that they have to.
They need to, they have to. Is that because the financial or
No, I
business
think
or
in
career path?
in the case from the clients I work with, it's much more career driven, not financial. There is the need to go back to work after the year in the maternity leave or whatever, and a lot of women say, well, I have to go back to work, I can't do this huge career pivot I want to do, etc. And I get that, but I think when someone goes back after 3 or 4 months, it's not necessarily the financial, it's much more from the career perspective. And that's certainly experiences I've had with who I work with. Sorry, I can't remember your question initially. Sorry.
That's fine. We've done it. We've answered it. You've answered it. Thanks, Tim. So your coaching. Let's go back into your coaching and how you work, and because I think the coaching business is massive now, isn't it? There are lots of coaches out there doing. I'll start again. The coaching business is massive, isn't it? So do you know what the growth is of the coaching world within this area?
I probably should know the trends. I don't. I know when I started my coaching journey 20 years ago, I did my first coaching qualification, and I was in awe of it. It was just phenomenal, and very few people were talking about it. And I was in the army at the time, and coaching was like mentoring. That is just unheard of. It certainly in the military space. It has changed radically now, and I actually left a corporate organization where the coaching culture was huge, and I think people are now leading, as you say, more authentically, but much more with a coaching and mentoring style than a directive, authoritative, hierarchical leadership style.
You said that the coaching business was very big within your last business. What do you mean by that?
So one of the reasons I joined the firm was it was a very people-centric culture. And I think coaching the leaders are now, certainly in my experiences in my last organisation, are being encouraged to coach more and get the individual to come up with the answers and use their capacity, their headspace, their intellect to drive something forward, rather than being more prescriptive in a leadership, a directive, authoritative manner. And I really rate that sort of organisation, and I rate people who lead in that way.
What do you think are some of the huge benefits of people coming into the coaching with you now?
One of the biggest benefits is certainly around headspace. Women that I work with have so little capacity in terms of time, space in their brains, and to have people to pause and reflect and support them do that, and hold space for somebody to really get their ducks in a row, find that clarity, get that confidence, find a bit more control about their next steps, and feel that they can achieve what they want to in their careers, for example, is incredibly satisfying, and my clients really value that. I think the way I coach on a one-to-one basis and a group basis, and those that join my group program feel incredibly empowered, inspired, and challenged all at the same time by the other women in the group, who are going through the same things. They're all like-minded, ambitious women, but to have the opportunity to discuss some of some really quite personal challenges in a forum which is safe and confidential and all of that, with women who can challenge and inspire and support, it is amazing.
I think there's a great belief that you can work on your own, and you can do very well like that. But when you often go into the work, and one of the things that people have missed out is the bouncing of ideas, the thoughts, the listening space, what people are doing. You get inspired by that. And I think by the group coaching, and I've done some of it with other groups, and it can be very exhilarating too.
Completely. And you don't feel alone. And, you share your thoughts, you share your ideas, and what works for one person might work for you, and it's something that you hadn't thought of, and you'll take it home and try, so.
And you're in a community that's growing. Sometimes we are all at different stages in our lives. Maybe the people who Certainly mine, I've got people who are retired and they're going off and travelling all the time. I'll continue working because I love working. But and so therefore you attract different people through the years of your life, don't you, who can then help you on the next part of your journey.
Completely. And I think a lot of people do muddle through themselves, and they try and find those answers on their own, and sometimes it's seen as a weakness to ask for support, and especially when you have to pay for it. But actually, having that support at certain phases of your life, it just gives you instant clarity. It gets you back on the right path, and it gets you focused to what you really want to achieve, and you can do that at 20 or at retirement going off traveling, but you need to be focused in what you want to achieve in life.
And actually, that community can make or break your business, because it could be just one idea. It's one thing that you change. And I've often said sometimes it's the little things, the tweaks that you do in life that can transform things. So talk to me through a day of, if I was going to come to you and do the coaching, how does it work? How does the system work?
So I use a framework to coach with all my clients. It's called a REACT framework. And that stands for reconnecting with fundamentally our values and our limiting beliefs, building emotional resilience, the E, accepting who we now are, committing to a new version of success, and thriving. And all my clients get access to a training platform with workbooks, resources, book recommendations, videos, training blogs, you name it, which are aligned to that framework. And then when I work with clients, they will come to calls with me, having obviously used the platform to get their thinking and ideas together. Perhaps made headway, move forward in a certain way, but have got a question or a topic or something that it's highlighted to themselves about how they feel, and they want to discuss it. So I meet my group clients every week, and my one-to-one clients generally every 3 to 4 weeks.
Can you give me an example of maybe a couple of people you might be working with, not in particular, but just as an idea?
I have got one lady who is in consulting. Two clients that are in consulting at the moment, who are in very senior leadership roles, who are one is about to return from mat leave in January. One is already back, about 6-8 months back, and both of them are thinking whether that career is for them now. So they're thinking about either, first of all, can we make it work? So I will work with them and give them tools and techniques, and we'll talk through how we can make it work. And if with that clarity and obviously some new techniques and new ways of thinking, they can't, and they know they can't, then the step is to step out and do something different. So that's a couple of clients I'm working with at the moment. I've had a recent client who interestingly stepped out of corporate to go for promotion. To go and run her own company. And she is now in the early stages, a couple of years behind me, but now setting up a coaching practice as well, which was amazing. And then so they've all gone through my group program. I have just literally yesterday finished working with a one-to-one client who was at board level. She had been made redundant recently, and huge knock in confidence, was like questioning whether she wanted to stay at that senior leadership level. And through a very intensive 4-week period where we worked together every week, she is now back in got a confident footing back on, and is deciding she is staying certainly where she is, and is in the process now of landing herself hopefully another CEO role of a global organisation. So
It's so interesting because you talk about people, particularly people in senior management roles and who've been very successful, paid huge sums of money to do what they're doing, and you can't believe that they get made redundant or they lose confidence or whatever it is. And we never know what's behind the facade, do we?
Not at all. Redundancy happens to so many of us, and sadly a lot of people who are sadly pregnant, and it is, I think, illegal, but a lot of people sadly lose their jobs in on maternity leave or pregnant or in those early days. In terms of the confidence piece and that imposter syndrome piece, I see that all the time with my clients, despite exactly what you've just said, despite having achieved amazing things in their career. They are lacking confidence, feel like an imposter, questioning their experience, their background, and a lot of it stems from the motherhood piece, because motherhood knocks our confidence. You've had a bit of time out, you then go back in, people have perhaps caught up, overtaken you, know more about the firm you're in, and it can be a terrifying place. And especially, obviously, if you made redundant and you're at that level, it's like, the industry knows, everyone knows that there are big changes afoot, and getting back in there and getting an equivalent role, it can be quite challenging.
Yeah. So I've asked the one question about organisations. I'd like to ask you, what are the organisations that are really clever at keeping those talented people?
The organisations that don't just live by DNA targets and actually actively go about supporting women and diversity in up on the leadership platforms, organisations that stay with old school views, just not changing with society, not changing with the demographic of people who are wanting perhaps to push on in their careers, I think will struggle. They'll struggle to retain the talent. They'll struggle to even get the talent in the first place. But organisations that do best are known to be organisations that have boards that are incredibly diverse. Groupthink is just not an issue, and organisations, people need to be challenged to think laterally, think differently, to come up with the best strategic solutions or whatever it might be for that organisation. And you can only do that when you give everyone a platform to speak, regardless of who they are, and hopefully come up with the best solution.
Do you know how lucky it is that we can have these conversations, isn't it, and be on podcasts like this? It's extraordinary, and it's something that I had a bit of imposter syndrome when I started this, and it's been some of the best times talking to people like you and getting to know subjects and getting it out to other people who can that these podcasts will support and things. But obviously our message is always about inspire, engage and bring people together. I do believe in the power of three. So what are the 3 key messages you would like to leave every mother to walk away with?
I think understand the word matrescence. Go away, just Google it if that's all you do. I think it will be life-changing if you bother to educate yourself a little bit in that space. I think secondly is start saying no, stop putting pressure on ourselves, start living how you want to live, not how other people tell you or how you think you should be living. A lot of women and mums in particular do the I should be doing this, I should be doing that. And it actually should be, I will and I want to do X rather than what society thinks. That's point 2. And point 3, I think, is around motherhood gives you opportunities that you might not have seen previously. And it's a huge transition. But actually transitions lead to opportunities, and we shouldn't be scared of change. we need to see change as something positive, that you can do things differently. It is okay to do things differently. It is okay to feel different about your direction of travel, and see it as an opportunity.
That's absolutely brilliant. It's quite funny. We had this conversation, I think, when we spoke a week or so ago about that some people like change and some people don't like change. And I don't think I'm very good at change, even though I had to do a lot of it. And I think you quite love change, don't you?
I do. I thrive on change. I've never found change specifically challenging, because I just always see it as providing something different, something new, and a new opportunity to explore or take hold of. So.
There's one last thing. There's a book that changed your life. Can you just tell us what it is?
This book here is the book Mama Rising by Amy Taylor-Kabbaz. She is the activist I mentioned at the start of the podcast. She is a matrescence coach and trainer. She wrote this book. I read it. I've read it twice, and obviously referred back to it a number of times as well. And that was the life-changing book that I read as a mum that made me realise that it was perfectly normal to feel how I did, and obviously has now made the trajectory into why I do what I do in my business.
Oh, well, thank you so much for all the information. I think it's really, really important that we get to understand this, because I think therefore we all feel together. We don't feel lonely in that space. And the work you're doing is phenomenal. Where can people find you?
I am predominantly on Instagram, really regularly in the DMs, posting on Instagram. My handle is @thrive_in_motherhood. I'm also on LinkedIn under Katherine Alt, my maiden name. And I guess my website is thriveinmotherhood.co.uk. I'm running I run regular masterclasses every month around achieving career ambitions without sacrificing time with your family or burnout. My next one's next week. I think the link might be in the show notes for that, so do come along and join.
We'll put it all in the show notes below. And please, anybody listening, don't forget to follow, share, download, send this to people who this will benefit from, because I think this is a very new phenomenon that people don't really understand. And there are people out there like Katherine, particularly Katherine, who is helping people through this transition. So thank you a million times for being on our podcast today. Thanks, Katherine.
Thank you, Caroline, so much. It's been brilliant being here.